joining us tonight. I was a Maine Park Ranger for 32 years. I'm from Skowhegan, from an area called Cornville, just outside of Maine. Cornville, outside of Skowhegan. Sue was from Millinocket. We met at the University of Maine at Machias. I've lived in the four corners of Maine as a park ranger and park manager and eventually supervisor of the Allagash Wilderness Waterway, a 92-mile wilderness canoe where you float north and some say back into time. So we're going to take you in the four corners of Maine tonight. How many here have been to Maine? Wow. Do you have favorite places in Maine that you'd like to go to?
Down east.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, not good.
We have coffee on to get up there.
What year were you in Machias?
I was there from 68 to 73.
Class of 65.
Oh, you
Oh,
okay.
you're from, oh,
Red,
you
Red
went to
Lewis
college
and
there?
Red Lewis.
Oh, Red, know him well. Yeah. And Leafy.
Yeah. And anybody else want to throw where they've been in Maine?
Hermit Island.
Yeah. Gorgeous spot.
I graduated from UMaine in Orono.
Okay.
Farmington.
Wow. You folks are going to be able to tell me some stuff tonight, I think. So we'll get right into it. And let's go to the next slide, sir. And we have bookmarks here, and the folks that didn't get one yet, they're on the table. And join us whenever you can. We're going to be in New Hampshire a lot. We're going to be at 3 Mile Island. We're going to be at some other facilities. We're going to be in Jackson. Not Jackson, Newport, excuse me. And so our bookmarks have a website on it, and check it whenever you can, because we're getting bi-monthly invitations to speak. And we enjoy coming to New Hampshire because my family's from Meriden. And supposedly I had a great uncle that owned Meredith Neck at one time. None of that got passed down through the family whatsoever, which is too bad. Maine is rich in natural resources. Has national state parks, Baxter State Park with Mile High Mount Katahdin, and the 92-mile Allagash Wilderness Waterway, where folks put a canoe in and paddle north for 92 miles. When they take out in Allagash Village, they look into New Brunswick, Canada, and the Allagash does flow north. It's kind of a Jeopardy style program. There aren't really any wrong answers, so you're welcome to holler out whatever you think when I ask a question. So let's see what we can discover. In 1820, Maine became a state. How did Maine receive its name? Why is our state called Maine?
There are two alternatives. One is Maine land, and the other was from part of France.
Have you seen my program before?
70-odd years in Maine. I hope so something.
Exactly right. The French province of Maine is a tribute to the wife of King Charles of England. And then the one I can understand and recognize is the state derives from a practical nautical term, the Maine or mainland, to distinguish the bulk of the state from the numerous offshore islands. Who is Maine's greatest map maker? He's the reason that Maine became its own state. It once was a district of
John Greenleaf.
The district of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, this could be a good crowd. This is the flag. It's just 2/3 of the way up in Maine, just west of Brownville, Maine. He lived in Williamsburg Township, which is still called that today. A pioneer map maker, an outspoken advocate of Maine statehood and economic development. His map of the District of Maine was the first to accurately depict the interior lakes and rivers of Maine. And here's that map. Not much north of Bangor in 1815. There are 48 state parks and historic sites in Maine. That's me when I began my ranger career at Sebago. What was Maine's first state park and where was it located?
We'll put this up.
And here's a list of all the state parks in the state. Anybody?
Acadia?
That's national.
Wow.
Okay, so the very first state park that surprised me was Rustic State Park in Prescott. That's where I began my first management assignment with the Bureau of Parks. This is Echo Lake. Where I lived is right here. Right up here is 1,100 foot tall Quaggy Joe Mountain. Some farmers got together and bought 600 acres and then gave it to the state to be a state park. Now, in planning for the future of the park, they decided to make it into a ski area. In fact, they plan on calling it the Aspen of the East. These are the ski trails. Parking, Echo Lake. Now, if you're going to have a ski area, you need to have something for people that don't ski, so they made a toboggan run. 600 feet long, had a vertical drop of 640 feet in less than a half a mile. And they iced this toboggan run. And they said that once you get on that toboggan, you was on the lake almost before you knew you left. And again, this was a very long time ago, and they didn't want to make people walk back up to get back on the toboggan. So they actually hooked up a motor to a toboggan so people could ride up and then get off onto another toboggan and slide back down. And if you're going to have a ski slope, you really need to have a ski jump. And this is on the north peak of Quaggy Joe Mountain. They went up there with the Conservation Corps of the time, chiseled that notch out, built a takeoff, and then one man never came down off that ski jump. If you look on the Olympics, when the jumpers come off a jump, they land on a slope.
Yeah.
The person that came off this landed on a flat. He says, just like landing in a cellar, he broke his leg, they closed it, and they never opened it again. Who was the governor that established Maine's first Bird Day and Be Kind to Animals Week? Hint, when his dog died, he ordered the state flags be lowered to half-mast. There's a very famous state park named after him.
Percival Baxter.
Percival Baxter, Baxter State Park. This is the governor with his dog Gary, because this is Mile High Mount Katahdin. He bought over 200,000 acres and donated it to the state of Maine with a huge trust to manage the park and run the park, and had 28 deeds of trust to ensure that the Baxter Park would be forever wild. He told me, my brother worked in Baxter 46 years and knew the governor. He told my brother, he said, they might break 2 or 3 deeds, but they're not going to break 28 deeds. Well, folks always like a place, but they like to change it sometimes. So Gary would go to the office with the governor every day, and he was an Irish setter. And when Gary needed to go outside, he'd let the governor know. The governor would come out of his inner office, walk to an outer door, open the door, and let the dog go out. Then the governor would come back into his inner office, close the door. And when Gary wanted to come back in, he'd come in from outside, and when he got to the governor's door, he'd scratch on the door. When the governor heard that, he'd get up and let the dog into his office. And several years ago, there were some janitors that decided they want to take those dog scratches off the door. And so that's a Gary scratch right there. And so some folks got together in the legislature, and as well as my brother, and they thought that was part of Maine history, so they put this little bronze plaque on that door, which is now the Secretary of State's office. So it's kind of neat. It's just a human interest story. This is Governor Baxter on the Allagash. They're in the deepest part of the Maine woods where the black flies are the worst. And I get kicked because they're all wearing neckties like they're going to the office. And then my brother Buzz went to A-Ball Campground in Baxter State Park as his first assignment. And he said to me, Tim, come on up, there's a mountain to climb and brook trout to catch. And I spent every summer with him until I turned 18 and got my own ranger's job at Sebago Lake. And recreation wasn't always easy to come by, or entertainment. Radio could only get French stations on a good day. And because we had no TV or VCRs those days. And that's me. And we got friendly with a raccoon that liked to come visit. And we let him in the cabin. We put a bowl of water on the floor, gave him a sugar cube, and he'd go over and wash the sugar cube in the water, and when it dissolved in the water, he'd look at his paws like, where in the world is my treasure? And so so we'd only do that a couple times, and we'd pick up the water and give him a sugar cube, then let him go back outside. How do backcountry rangers like those in Baxter Park get fresh supplies? Any ideas?
Take them in.
Lug 'em in? Airplane maybe?
Yeah.
Invite your family to come in. We had an aunt that was a great cook, so we always invited her because she always brought cream rolls and whoopie pies and whatever had you with him. And so my brother and I were working around A-Ball Campground one day, and some kids came down and they said, Ranger Buzz, can we ask you a question? He said, sure. They said, you live so far from town, how do you get your fresh supplies? Well, he thought for a minute and said, well, we have a garden of vegetables. We catch brook trout whenever we can. If we need fresh milk, we just go out and milk a moose. They said, you milk a moose? And he said, yeah. They said, can we help? Well, she's kind of tame, but if you want to help, you've got to be here right at the crack of dawn because moose like to get going first thing in the morning. And so the crew was sick, said we'll be back, and then we're skipping off for the day's adventure. My brother and I worked around the campground and went for a midnight swim at A-Ball Pond. When we get up the next morning, it's my turn to make breakfast, so I made a fire in the old-fashioned wood cook stove. And I'm in the refrigerator getting the food out to cook when my brother hears a noise outside. He opens the door, and here come the 6 kids skipping down out of the campground, and they're actually singing, we're going to milk a moose, we're going to milk a moose. There we go, we're going to milk a moose. Well, he said, oh my gosh, Jim, here come the 6 kids, what am I going to do? Before I could answer, he grabbed an empty water bucket, took a vodka Carnation instant milk out of the cupboard, dumped that in, took the hot water from the back of the cook stove, poured that into the instant milk, stirred up with a piece of kindling, and when the knock came on the front door, he said, you keep them busy. I'm 11 years old. Okay. So I went to the door, and the kids just beaming with the experience they know they're going to have. And I said, I'm sorry, kids, I don't think it's going to work today. The moose got here early. We don't know where she is. I don't think it's going to work. They were so disappointed. Their faces melted to a frown, and I thought they were going to cry at any minute. They're looking at me, I'm looking at them. We don't know what to say to each other when they hear whistling behind them. They turn and look, and here comes my brother walking down that same driveway that had just walked down. And they circled him and demanded to know why he went without them. And he explained Moose got there early and she needed to go about her business after the milking. Well, the little guy in the red hat was kind of skeptical, and he said, that's not moose milk. So my brother said, try it. Look, he lowered the bucket. The little guy stuck his finger in, smelled it, licked his finger off, and then with a wide-eyed expression declared, my gosh, it is moose milk. So we were on the way home after telling the story a few years ago in Portland, and on the way home, Sue said, I was there. You were where? I was with that group of kids when your brother milked the moose. And so this is a cartoon I had drawn of the Girl Scout representing the first time she and I met, although we never talked until we attended the University of Maine, Machado. After A-Ball, we headed to remote Russell Pond. This is A-Ball here. We came around here by road to Roaring Brook, where we parked the car, then hiked 7.2 miles into a remote campground called Russell Pond. And as we went, we passed through a landmark called New City. Now that was the site of an old lumbering camp. There hasn't been anything there for over 100 years, but that area is still called New City today. I'm going to ask you to remember that because I'm going to tell you something about it in a minute. This is the campground at Russell Pond, great trout fishing. How high is Mount Katahdin?
5,267 feet.
Excellent. I'm going to be back here in May. Are you around?
I hope so.
5,267, just 13 feet short of a mile. So several years ago, some scouts and other groups went up there and they piled rocks up 13 feet high. So it could be called the Mile High Mountain. This is on Baxter Peak, looking out towards Patton. And in Newbook, which I'll explain in a minute, I have a picture of 2 snow sleds sitting right on Baxter Peak that was done in the 60s, and that's quite a story. When my brother's in Baxter Park, at the base of the mountain, it was sculptured by glaciers 15,000 years ago. I was his neighbor to the north on the Allagash waterway. From the Disney movie Bambi, where was the whitetail born? Where was Bambi born?
Good one.
I couldn't hear you.
He said New City.
There you go. Good memory. This is Pomola. He's the evil spirit of Katahdin. He's the reason why the Native Americans wouldn't go above the tree line. If there was a heavy windstorm, bad rain, or blizzard, whatever, a tornado, whatever it was because Pomola was displeased. He had the head of a moose, upper torso of a human, then the wings and the lower torso of an eagle. And that was drawn by Morris Jake Day. Jake Day was an illustrator for Walt Disney Studios. An amazing artist. He lived at Damariscotta. This is another one of his paintings. Mountain climbing bears. When Disney was going to make the movie Bambi, Bambi is an Austrian hunting story. And Walt Disney was going to use the California mule deer as the model for Bambi. And Jake convinced Walt Disney that a white-tailed deer, a baby fawn, was a much prettier deer than the California mule deer with the big ears. So they went to Phillips in Strong, Maine, and they found 2 orphan baby deer, 2 orphan fawns, flew them to California, put them into the middle of a giant room where artists spent days drawing every movement those deer made. And Walt Disney said to Jake, he said, I like what you've suggested. I want to use those deer as the model for the movie. Go back and find where Bambi can be born. Jake Day loved Baxter State Park, loved Russell Pond, and so he walked up to the new city clearing, and in a book that was written in 1938, he wrote, as we came into the new city clearing, we paused to look at the meadow towards the wooded slopes of Russell Mountain. The thought came at once. This is Bambi's birthplace, a clearing where the forest creatures came for food and play. Here's the edge of the forest where they disappeared when danger threatened. A knoll from which the elder deer could keep an eye on its offspring. It was perfect. So they took pictures of the new city clearing and the landscape, sent those pictures to California, and that's where the images came from for the movie. And now Sue's going to take over. Her grandfather was a river driver for Great Northern Paper Company, and she's going to tell you a short story about her mother.
They drove logs down the Maine rivers until the middle of the 17th. Started in the middle of the 17th century and ended about 1976. From the old river driving days of logging, what is a log boom?
Logs hooked together to keep the floating logs as you're moving down the river together so that they don't disperse in the wind.
That's right. You want to go? This is a set of log booms, and they're at the mouth of a river, and so they would send the logs down the river, and they would collect, and once that was full, then they would take them down to the mills in Millinocket. And this is where my grandparents lived. This is on Amagegus Lake. It's north of Millinocket, and it's now on the National Register of Historic Places. And as a young kid, every summer, I stayed with them at this facility. This is my grandparents. And an interesting story about my grandmother, because they had meal cooks in the woods. But when it was time for the cook to go for the couple of days off, my grandmother would fill in. And his name was Mike. Well, one day, Mike left for his days off and never came back. To this day, no one knows what happened to him. I've seen different loggers that worked with my grandfather, and no one has a clue. Just one day he left. So my grandmother kept on cooking. Because at that time, no, there wasn't very many women cooks. And so one day my grandfather said to her, "How would you like to have the permanent job?" And she said, "I don't think Great Northern's going to allow a woman to do that." And he said, "Well, I'll find out." So he went down to Millinocket and he talked to him. And when he come back, he had that white outfit for my grandmother. And she became the cook. And the little person next to her, that's me. And so when my grandmother, at that point, no one knew that she was there except for the personnel down to Millinocket. So when it was time to get groceries, she had to call them out over that two-way radio system. Now that two-way radio goes all over the whole North Country. So here's my grandmother, gets on and starts ordering food. Well, she doesn't just order beans. She orders pork chops, she makes lasagna, because there was only like a 10-person crew. And if there was somebody that maybe had an ulcer, well, she made special food for them. And all of a sudden, all these men cooks were saying, "Who's this woman? What's she doing? And why is she ordering that food?" And so for a while, it was quite an ordeal that my grandmother was ordering different foods. But once they met her, they all fell in love with her and really liked her. And she was a great cook. And so that's Millinocket. And if you go up the Golden Road towards Baxter Park, where the arrow is, that's where the boom house was.
That's where the west branch of the Penobscot
Yeah.
River and Jesus Lake on the way to the mills.
Right. It came down from Chisuncook and north of Chisuncook, down the river. And this was the two modes of transportation. One of them was the canoe, and they had the log boom on the lower part of the river. So they kept canoes above the log boom so they could go up the river and check the logs to make sure they weren't getting hitched up on rocks or whatever. And off to the right is a flat bottom boat. And that's the one that they would use from the boom house. And they could go and they could hit those boom logs. And when it hit the boom logs, those boom logs would drop. And then they would drive the boat up over, pick the motor up, and then go up the river. And because that's me on the left. And when it got full, those booms got full, my grandfather would call Millinocket and they would send a boom boat up. They would connect on and then they would take it down the lakes to Millinocket to be processed. We know that at 74,890 acres, Moosehead Lake is Maine's largest lake. What is the state's second largest lake at over 30,000 acres?
Sebago.
Wow. Good group.
That's where I began my ranger career, at the campground Sebago Lake State Park. And my first summer, I learned about Fry's Island and a place called Fry's Leap. And the legend of that is that in the 18th century, Captain Fry was being chased by Indians. And he came to this 50-foot cliff, and he jumped off the cliff into the lake. And there are two stories here. One is he swam across the half mile to Fry Island, or he jumped out on the ice and ran across the Fry Island. But the Native Americans, according to legend, was so impressed with that feat of bravery that they painted Indian petrographs, Indian drawings, all over that ledge. And for years, people were coming down just to see that. All those have disappeared by now. But you'll see a canoe, and this might be a bear. There's all kind of, here's an arrow being shot, someone fishing there, all kinds of images. And so I got curious about that, and I started asking people about it. And they knew the story, but they didn't know the exact details of what actually had occurred. And I asked our state historic preservation about it, and they wouldn't even discuss it. And then I eventually met a woman who got Captain Fry's journal that he kept, and she went through his whole journal, and never once in his diary did he mention that he'd been chased by Indians. And apparently he's quite influential because the town of Freiburg is named after him. And so I found this postcard that you just saw the front of it. This is the back of it. So I think what happened in the 20s, the people in the Sebago Lake area wanted to bring tourism into the area, so they made up this legend of the Fry jumping off the ledge and the Indians throwing petrographs, because they would take tour boats down there. So when the images were still visible, take tour boats down so people could see it. Here's an Indian standing there looking up the lake. However, there's a distinct difference between the etchings on Fry's Lake compared to those historically certified that were made by Native Americans. These are images that were chiseled into rock in Chiasport, Maine, eastern Maine, 3,000 years ago. Not a bit of paint in them whatsoever. No berry paint or rock paint. This is another image, petrographs. That's from that same area. Looks like it might be a deer or maybe even caribou in the old days. So there's a big difference between what was on Fry's Lake to what was actually done by the Native Americans. What was a popular way for early Native Americans to cook their food? Old fire, yes. This is firecracked rock, and this is on the shore of one of the Allagash lakes. And when the Native Americans want to cook their food, they would use birch bark containers, also called vessels. Now we know you can't put birch bark over an open fire, but it is waterproof. So they create a vessel, something like this, line the inside edge with their food, leaving a hollow in the middle, then cover that food with water, and then they heat rocks this size and maybe a little bit bigger in a campfire. When those rocks get red hot, they pick them up with a forked stick, drop them into that birch bark vessel, and those hot rocks would heat the water, cooking the food. While the hot rocks was heating the water and cooking the food, the cold water was cooling off these rocks so fast, the rocks couldn't stand that rapid loss of temperature, so they break apart in little bits and pieces. When the natives would be done eating, the food would be all gone, but they'd want to use those birch bark containers for another meal, and they didn't need those chips and pieces in the bottom of the containers, so they simply tipped them over on the beach wherever they'd had their lunch. These are what's called firecracked rock that was used over hundreds of years ago to cook a meal on the shore of an Eagle Lake, on the Allagash. And you can still find several of those places, and if you do find one, if you look around, you might find what I found. The stone axe. This is the cutting edge. That's the crab. When I turned that over to historic preservation for safekeeping, they estimate that stone axe was 5,000 years old. That's me at Russell Pond. There's no tobacco in that pipe. Well, my brother made me do that and pose up and then sent that picture to my mother and said we found a way for Tim to keep the black flies away. And I had quite a story to convince my mother that I wasn't smoking at 10 years old into Russell Pond. So will black bears break into a person's camp?
Yes.
What would they want? Food. They will do anything for food. When we went to work on the Allagash, this is our headquarters. This once belonged to a international paper company. It was their VIP camp to bring the clients in to wine and dine them. when the people of Maine voted to establish the Allagash, all the buildings within a 500-foot strip was bought by the state and became either supervisors' quarters or rangers' quarters or sporting camps. And so that's where Sue and I lived when we first went into the Allagash in 1981. Well, half a mile down the road, there was another camp that belonged to the Allagash. This camp here, and my ranger Dave lived there. Dave lived in Popham Beach, down on the coast, and he'd work 10 days on and have 3 days off. And when he had 3 days off, he'd go back to Popham Beach, then he'd come back. When he got back, he'd radio me by two-way radio and say, I'm on the way out. He wanted to know what had happened while he's gone, if there's something he needed to watch for, or something he needed to take care of. So I knew he was coming, so I had coffee ready. And when I heard his footsteps outside, I opened the door, getting ready to invite him in, and I smelled the smell of skunk.
Oh.
So I took his coffee outside. And I said, what happened, Dave? He said, well, I got back late last night from days off, and I went to bed, and I jumped out of bed this morning, but I didn't know 2 skunks had moved in underneath my camp. When I jumped out of bed, I scared them, and they sprayed. I said, what are you going to do? You can't go the whole summer like that. He said, I think if I walk around my stocking feet and I'm really quiet, I think you'll be okay. So we went through the whole summer with those skunks underneath his camp. The 2 skunks fell in love, and they had 4 of the cutest babies you'd ever imagine. So Dave's on canoe patrol one day, and it had been such a busy day, he hadn't even had time to eat his lunch. He come back, starved to death right at the edge of dark, and he cooked up the quickest meal he could think of. Beans and bacon. There's nothing a bear doesn't like any better than pork. That bear was walking by, smelled the bacon, climbed up on the roof of Dave's camp. That's the kitchen right there. Started tearing the shingles off the camp. Dave didn't want the bear in the camp. He didn't want a hole in his roof. And so he grabbed a hardwood broom handle and pounded the ceiling. When he pounded the ceiling, the now 6 adult skunks underneath the camp, all sprayed, filled the camp with a skunk fog. It went through the camp and went up through that little vent hole the bear had created, hit the bear right in the nose. That made the bear mad because he couldn't get to the bacon now. So he come down off the roof, climbed in through the side window of Dave's truck, and ate the seat out of the truck. So when Dave went back to Popham on his next days off, the only thing he had to sit on was an upside down plastic bucket for the 3.5 hours it took to go from the Allagash to Popham. Who was the first legally registered guide in Maine? Hint, she also legally shot the last native caribou in Maine. She's very famous. She's from Phillips, Maine.
Crosby.
Fly-Rod Crosby. This is her. She became the first guide in 1897. She would go to sportsman shows outside of the state where they'd build a little cabin where she would stand on the porch and tell people why they should come to Maine to hunt and fish. There was an aquarium in there with landlocked salmon in it and brook trout. And she was so successful to educate people about the significance, natural significance of Maine, that they actually created a lifetime achievement award for her. This is in the Fish and Wildlife Office in Augusta, the sculpture. And then a friend of mine just won this award last summer, Alexander Conover Bennett, very talented person on the outside, teaches a lot about outdoor skills and wilderness skills. And so now there is a lifetime achievement award in the honor of Fly-Rod Crosby, and I'm pleased to say that my friend Alexander received it. This is Ranger Lake. This is some of the country that Fly-Rod would travel and fish. There's also a waterfall loop. We can go around and see all these different waterfalls. Small falls, Angel Falls, Rumford Falls. Gorgeous area, clean, cool water. Here's our golden cooling off.
Oh.
Where is down East Maine? Now, if you listen to some of the news reports on TV, they think all of Maine is down east. But that's not true, and you can't answer this. Where is down East Maine? Where do you think it starts?
Bar Harbor.
say?
Hancock and Washington County.
Hancock and Washington County.
Yeah.
Now it's called down east because when the sailing ships come up there, even though they were sailing northeast out of Boston, they were going with the wind, so they actually were sailing down east. And that's why it's called down east today. And there's a cove right here that's on the map of Maine called Bailey's Mistake. And in the 18th century, Captain Bailey was sailing a shipload of lumber out of Boston, heading towards Lubeck Narrows. And when he got in the fog, and he kind of got lost, and he went into a dead end cove. And there's a lot of heavy tide there, 12 to 20 feet, depending on high tide, low tide, those kind of things. Well, he sailed into that cove, and then he couldn't get out because the tide left him high and dry. And so this poem was written about Bailey's Mistake, and that cove is still called Bailey's Mistake on the maps today.
Good friends gather round, and the truth I'll relate, how a cove near Lubeck became Bailey's Mistake. There was a bold captain whose name was Bailey, and his ship ended up where it was not supposed to be. So here's to our captain, where he may be, a friend to the sailor on land and on sea. Ye mariners all, weigh the risk that ye take, lest you be remembered like Bailey's Mistake. He set sail from Boston down east for Lubeck, with a cargo of lumber piled high on the deck. He skirted Cape Ann with nary a fear, and our crew gave a cheer as the Maine coast drew near. As we closed on Lubeck, we were socked in by fog, but continued to sail by compass and log. As our ship ghosted in, "Look sharp," Bailey said. "You'll soon see the Narrows off West Quoddy Head." But alas for poor Bailey, no Narrows we found, and in a large cove our ship ran aground. Said Bailey, as sailors, "There's no way we can win. Let's unload the lumber, build homes, and move in." So here's to old Bailey, who sailed the salt sea till his ship ended up 'twas not supposed to be. He'd be sailing still could he just navigate, but he's doing quite well selling prime real estate.
And that is Bailey's Cove, that picture. Where in Maine was the first naval battle of the American Revolution, also called the Lexington of the Seas?
Castine. No.
No. Good guess, though. Machias. Occurred in 1775, also called the Lexington of the Seas. It was when the settlers engaged the British ship Margaretta with their sloop, the Unity, and they captured the British ship. And this was the first English vessel to be taken by the colonists. And this is reenacted every year, Machias, about Father's Day weekend. And here are the reenactors. There'll be British redcoats, there'll be colonists, there'll be Native Americans, and they actually reenact some of the battles. And actually, a British soldier was shot out of the Margaretta boat, and they reenact that where a guy dressed up as British, they shoot a blank at him and he falls out of the boat, and that water's ice cold year round. And these are androns, fireplace androns. It's been in my family for years. And I thought they were British soldiers. In fact, I haven't painted it as such because I don't put them in a fire anymore. And then I talked to a guy at the reenactment last year and showed him that picture. He said, "No, those are Hessians. Those are images of German soldiers. 30,000 Germans, Hessians, were hired by English to come over and fight the colonists. And the colonists were so upset about those Germans coming over to fight Britain's battles that they had these made and put them in the fireplaces so these bad soldiers could burn for eternity." And that was their way to get back at the German Hessians. Where is the easternmost point in the United States?
Campobello.
That's New Brunswick.
Lubeck.
West Quarte Lighthouse, guarding the Quarte Channel, passage between US and Grand Manan. Right over here is Quarte Head State Park. A portrait of the old coast. When there's a bad storm coming in, Sue and I would go over and watch the hurricane winds or whatever is happening. We stay well back from the water course, but just to watch that, it's really quite powerful. But it's also a good place to whale watch, and it's got 5 miles of trail out there, and it's gorgeous if you get a chance to be that way. Where in Maine are the highest number of eagles nests found in the American Northeast? Washington County, off the Bay of Fundy. Bald eagle has a 6-foot wingspan. Their nest can be 8 feet wide and 12 feet high, weighing more than 2 tons. And the reason that they're at the Bay of Fundy, the sea levels average 32 to 49 feet. The bay becomes narrower and shallower towards its head, forcing the water higher up on the shore. That's what causes the high tides. But this water is so clean, so flushed, that's why the eagles nest there. That's the highest concentration in the northwest east, is just outside of Washington County in that whole Bay of Fundy. So the concentration of our American symbol demonstrates the pristine quality of the area's environment. This is Cobscook Bay, 10 miles wide and 10 miles long. There's Reversing Falls right here, which is gorgeous. And there's a little speck right there called the Roaring Bull. And a friend of mine, when I used to duck hunt, would take me down there by boat. And at low tide, he put me out on that Roaring Bull ledge, and I'd pass shoot ducks that was coming in. And then he'd pick me up and bring me home. But what he didn't tell me was that while that ledge was 6 feet out of water at low tide, at high tide it was 4 feet underwater. He never told me that. I'm just tickled that his motor never broke down, so he couldn't bring me back. This is Cobscook Bay State Park. It's a gorgeous park. You can dig clams there, get some really fresh seafood that's well cooked and inexpensive. And I'm on ranger patrol one day in the park, and this woman comes running up to me and stops my pickup. Says, Ranger, you got rabbits hanging out of your trees. So, well, I had checked that out for sure. And what happened was that a great horned owl had 2 babies that didn't want to leave the nest. They had food delivered, they had warmth, they didn't want to leave the nest. So the mother went out on the nearby field, caught 2 rabbits, killed them, hung them on limbs on that tree about 1.5 to 2 feet below the babies. The babies wanted to eat, got out, and they were hanging upside down off one limb while the rabbits were hanging upside down here. And I ran back to my cabin to get a camera so I could take a picture. By the time we got back, both the baby great horned owls and the rabbits were gone. Where is the largest whirlpool in the Western Hemisphere? This is the Old Sow. It's between Moose Island, Eastport, and Deer Island, New Brunswick. They say it's high. At the highest tide, it can be 250 feet in diameter, and it actually shut down the clipper ship in the old days. It's called the Old Sow due to the noise, pig-like noise it makes when churning. And they asked the fisherman that went out there with a rowboat what it was like to get caught in the Old Sow, and he replied, I didn't mind so much getting caught in it. What I resented was having to row uphill to get out of it. And similar whirlpools are in Norway, Scotland, and Japan. They'll give you tour boats right by the edge of that.
And it's not fun.
Do you have favorite biting flies down here in New Hampshire? No-see-ums? Yep. Black flies? Moose flies? This is the Allagash. It flows north. And when you get up here to Long Lake, there's remnants of an old dam. And that dam's all gone now. In fact, that's what it looked like when it had a 15-foot head wall of water behind it. Huge dam, but that's all washed away. And this is what's left here today, just the old sluiceway. And there's a campsite right here. And it's a gorgeous campsite. stand on the campsite, you look up, you'll see deer feeding on the buds of wild roses. You'll hear loons calling. You'll hear sea osprey catching fish. You look downstream, there'll be moose feeding and ducks swimming and trout jumping, but the black flies are awful. In my book, Heading North, my granddaughter's on a trip with her family, and they get to Long Lake Dam, and the black flies are so bad that they come out and attack the family the minute they get to shore. The family builds a campfire, throws wet leaves and grass on it to drive the bugs away. The bugs will not be deterred, so the family is forced to go inside the tent well before the sun goes down to get some relief from the biting insects. The mother and father start reading. My granddaughter at 10 has a journal, diary she's keeping every day. And thinking about the black flies, she writes the first poem she's ever written. And Sue's going to read that to you now.
No seams, gnats, and such. I do not like bugs. I do not like them at all. I don't like them big, and I don't like them small. They bite and chew and fly all about. They crawl in my mouth, and I spit them out. They make me scratch, they make me itch, they make me rub, they make me twitch. I try to get away, but alas, I cannot. No matter where I go, there are always a lot. To these pests I say, for them to leave and fly away. Do not bother while I am around and visit here when I cannot be found. I do not like bugs. I do not like them at all. The next time I canoe, it'll be in the fall. Olivia Catherine.
So, that book that Susan read from is a tale of two diaries. The diary my granddaughter keeps today, and then the next page will revert back to something I witnessed 20 years before as a ranger up there. So I'm on ranger patrol after
It's not in here.
It isn't?
No,
It's
it's in another one.
Oh, okay. What's the next picture?
Aliens.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you a story now.
Yeah, tell the story. It's cute.
So I'm on ranger patrol, and I go down Long Lake Dam, and there's a woman standing on the campsite. Her head is down. The canoe's on the site beside her. The gear's all on the picnic table. I'm in uniform, so I'm identified as a ranger. And when my aluminum canoe runs up on the gravel, she hears that, looks up, and immediately her face is beet red. She is not happy to see me arrive. And I'm going to portage my gear around because spikes on that old dam will pop up and will rip a hole in the canoe if you're not careful. So I chose to lug my gear around. So I carried my canoe by her, and she's burping. I come back by, get another load, she's burping worse. The third time by, she has some severe internal disruption going on. And I said, are you okay? I can get you out of here, or I can get you help, or I can get you flown out of here if necessary. You need to tell me what's happening. She said that she read in a survival magazine that how bad the black flies were in the Allagash, and that magazine suggested that she take a packet of active dry yeast, flesh ones, put it in a cup of hot water, and drink that, and it cause a chemical reaction and keep all the black flies away. I don't know about the black flies, but kept our whole party away. They'd all left her behind, gone downstream. And she assured me she'd be okay, but she was in agony when I talked to her. And I said, okay, I'll check on you in about 3 hours, and which I did do. She's fine, but then she'd work through it. But the poor lady was in hard shape for a while. Where in Maine did the most documented abduction of aliens occur? This is in the top 10 questions we get asked. It's on TV once or twice a year, generally. On the Allagash.
Oh.
On Eagle Lake, there's a place there called Smith Brook Campsite, and 4 guys went up. These are the 4, Allagash 4 they call themselves. They got to Smith Brook Campsite, decided to do some night fishing. They built a bonfire to serve as a beacon in case it got dark while they're out on the water. All 4 climbed into one canoe, went out. When they got out onto the water away from shore, they saw this thing come up over the horizon. This guy, trying to be funny, signals SOS. The next thing they know they're back on shore. The fire built to last hours is stone cold out. they feel nauseous, like they're coming out of some kind of anesthesia or operation, and eventually they realized that they're abducted by aliens and had biological samples removed from them. They wrote a book about it called Allagash Abductions, and several years ago they were the keynote speakers at a UFO convention in Portland, well, about 5 or 6 years ago, I guess. But it's in the top 10 questions just because it is on TV and the book has been written.
So we have people ask us, they want to know where it is, because maybe they can go be abducted. And then we have people say, we want to know where it is because we want to stay way, way far away.
Do you have a favorite recipe when you to use over the fire when you go camping? Generally people say s'mores, marshmallows, roast hot dogs.
Steak.
Steak. Ours is roasting watermelon. I'm getting funny looks. I'm on ranger patrol, my daughter's with me, and we walk onto a campsite. So I always like to visit with the campers to learn about their experiences, what they've seen, what they've learned, and anything I can point out the next day about where the rapids are, where the spring water is that they can get. And again, I'm in uniform. And I walk onto a campsite one night, and there's a big ball of tinfoil on the fireplace. I'm staring down at it like that, and one of the guys said, "You're probably wondering what we're doing." I said, "Well, I am kind of curious." They said, "We're roasting a watermelon." Really? You can learn something every time you go to the Maine woods. So I said, "How does that work?" He said, "You take a medium-sized watermelon, you wrap it with 3 layers of wet dishcloth, 3 layers of tinfoil, put that over a hot fire, and turn that every 10 minutes for an hour. It'll crystallize the sugar in the watermelon, turning into a watermelon caramel, and it's very, very good." My daughter's tugging on my sleeve because we haven't had supper yet. And she said, "Dad, can we try it? Can we try it?" And I said, "Gee, it sounds great." And so I'm talking and visiting there a little bit more. This guy's turning this watermelon on a routine basis. So it's finally time for my daughter and I to go back to my canoe where Sue's going to have our supper waiting at our camp. And I get back to the canoe and the man's following me down. He said, "Ranger, can I tell you something?" I said, "Sure." He said, "It's a rock." I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "We wrapped up a rock, told the guy it's a watermelon. He's been turning it every 10 minutes or half an hour, and he's got another half an hour to go."
That's fantastic.
And so with that, we'll entertain any questions you may have. We have several of our books over there. Our list of where we're going to be presenting is over there, and join us whenever you can. We've got 8 different programs that we offer. Is there any questions that I can answer that you'd like to make?
Tim, was you going to say something out of the book?
Oh. What was that?
Where do you live?
We live in Millinocket at the base of Mount Katahdin.
Okay.
This is our latest book. My brother and I wrote 2 books. Conversations was the first one. This is the second one, Conversations 2. It's Ranger Tales from Baxter Park and the Allagash. And this has got such things as Bigfoot sighted in Baxter Park, black flies along the Allagash, snowmobiles on Katahdin, are there bears, you ask, attack of the killer bear, and practical jokes. So there's a lot of real life stuff in all my books. And we look forward to coming back and visiting with you folks when we can. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much.